It's my pleasure indeed to be here with you tonight. My own connections with Roadhouse go back a long time. I've been a member of the Archaeological Society, but I was here in 1966 when it was first reopened after the major refurbishment works. My late friend Seamus Costello, the jeweller from High Street, and Bill Bergen, a schoolmate of mine at St. Kieran's College. And it'll be 60 years next year since that major event in the modern life of Roadhouse. I hope you find the talk interesting and informative, but again, I would say it comes with a degree of health warning that, as you know, when you go researching these things, there's information you find out in the library, which is generally very accurate, but there's also anecdotal stories told, some of which have to be retained by me so as to protect the guilty. The people I've met on my journey, I started out major research about 3 years ago on the railways after having a huge interest in the railway all my life. And it's been a very rewarding experience from meeting all the people that I've met, but especially gatekeepers and their families who are still residing in the gatekeeper lodges that survive on the line, particularly the Kilkenny to Waterford line and Kilkenny to Bagnallstown line, for the want of a better term, and the interesting stories. But also in South Kilkenny, I just touched briefly on it. There's 5 railway lines that ran through South Kilkenny, all from Ferrybank Station, which is referred today as Waterford. Now, I don't know when the war was to change the name of Ferrybank to Waterford Station, but anyway, it's known as Plunkett Station today. Construction commenced on the Kilkenny Junction by the Kilkenny Junction Railway Company in 1864. That is the Kilkenny to Maryborough line, and it was known as Maryborough right up until the foundation of the Irish Free State in 1922, when Maryborough became Portlaoise, and it went via Dunmore West Junction, and from there the branch line to Castlecomer and Deer Park Colliery ran. But there was only one station technically in Kilkenny on the line in County Kilkenny after Kilkenny, and that was Ballyragget on the northwestern line to Maryborough. Attanagh station, despite much of Attanagh, the townland of Attanagh, half been in Kilkenny and the other half been in Laois. And Attanagh Church, former Church of Ireland church in Attanagh village, but the Catholic population would defer to Ballyragget. I was up in Ballyragget the other day. I was just explaining briefly earlier to Anne and to Fancy that we interred a 92-year-old gem of a historian in Dermot Dorgan, the former postmaster at Attanagh. And Dermot was a mine of information. He could have saved me years of research had I met him much earlier. What he didn't know about the railways wasn't worth talking about. An amazing man. And he told it in such a way that you could tell he was totally immersed with the community. And he continued to work as a postmaster in the post office until he was 90 years of age. It was only a couple of years ago. Well, ably assisted by his daughter, Julie. Just to ask you if you have signed in, and if you can, just provide me with your email and mobile number. We have formed, as of this year, a Kilkenny Railway Heritage Society. We met earlier in the year, and we formed a committee led by a number of former station masters, both in Kilkenny and in Thomastown and elsewhere that I could find them. But also CIE's first female clerk, Mary Holden. I'm delighted to see you here tonight too, Mary, formerly Mary O'Neill at the station in Ballyhale. And we would be hoping that some of you might contemplate joining the society. We're meeting shortly to set down an agenda for next year and a plan for next year, and you'll be more than welcome to join us. I was born in Ennisnag, Danesfort in 1948. We moved to New Park in Kilkenny City in 57, thus very close to the railway station. Became fascinated with all things railways. The station was only a short stroll away from our home at New Park. The sight of trains coming and going during the day and the shunting of freight wagons in the evening was an everyday occurrence at the station for many years. I was also worked in a part-time summer job as a lounge boy at the Railway Hotel, once owned by the McGrath family from Ballyragget. That's the Kilford Arms Hotel today. And the McGrath family were particularly famous because of that connection. And Father McGrath in St. Canice's was 18 years a curate in Canice's and was the icon for every young boy growing up in terms of all the facilities, basketball, soccer, hurling, camogie, handball. He was at the centre of all that. There was very little delinquency back when Father McGrath was active in the parish. And there's been many other good priests there since. I retired from business in 2013 as centre manager at McDonagh Junction shopping centre in the heart of the old railway complex. This photograph was taken on a heritage train that was visiting McDonagh station there a few years ago, and you will see that there's not much heritage about the locomotive. The original locomotive broke down on the way and they had to send a replacement to bring it through. But it was a lovely occasion. All the carriages are all vintage, and there was a fife and drum band from the north played all the way from the station down to the city centre with all the passengers following them. It was a lovely occasion. This is the entrance to Kilkenny City at Attanagh Bridge, which is a fabulous setting and shows Kilkenny's immediate connection with the railway to all visitors by road on the old Dublin Road. So just to get back to a potted overview of the railways, many railway operators were licensed in the mid-19th century. Most went bust within a short space of time. Some of the more familiar ones were the South Eastern Railway Company, the Central Ireland Railway Company, Waterford Railway, Kilkenny Railway Company, Kilkenny Junction Railway Company, the Great Southern and Western Railway Company, and the South East Railway Company. We'll come to it a wee bit later, but essentially they all eventually emerged under the Great Southern and Western Railway Company in the south of Ireland, which of course in 1954 became Chorus Umpair CIE. The railway first arrived in Kilkenny when the Kilkenny to Waterford line opened a section from Kilkenny to Thomastown on the 12th of May 1848. Major construction obstacles to be overcome were at Jerpine Viaduct and the marshy lands near the Shure Estuary in South Kilkenny. That's why the Waterford station as such didn't open until 6 years after Kilkenny, before those great obstacles had been overcome. But the station was completed in 1847 at a cost of 31,000 sterling, or in today's money, that would equate to 4.9 million in today's money. But it was originally estimated at 14,000 to construct the station. But as you can see, overruns are nothing new. This is our logo for the Kilkenny Railway Heritage Society. And as you can see, it's intended to be a plaque that will go up at various points to mark the Kilkenny to Maryborough line, 1867 to 1962. On the technicality, the line, according to the records in CIE, closed on the 31st of December 1962, but there was a mopping up operation done in Castlecomer and a train ran in on the Deer Park Colliery Castlecomer line to Kilkenny on the following day, the 1st of January 63. So don't be caught out if you're asked that question in a quiz in the future. Now, this is the founding father of the railway in Ireland. He was a magnificent engineer, William Dargan, and a bit like Ferrybank and Ross Birkin being in Kilkenny as opposed to New Ross. He was from Graiguecullen, but he was also very strong at Graiguecullen in County Laois rather than Graiguecullen in Carlow. And it's always a point of contention to the people living on either side of the river over there. So, as you can see, he was 68 years of age when he passed away, but before he did, he certainly made his mark. There's a statue of William Dargan on the lawn at Leinster House. He built the first commuter railway line in the world from Dublin to Kingstown in 1834. He He was arguably the most important Irish engineer of the 19th century, certainly the most important in railway construction throughout Ireland. He's had 2 railway bridges named after him, one in Belfast and the other in Dublin, as recently as 1995 and 2004, respectively. He was responsible for the Great Dublin Exhibition of 1853. If any of you have researched that or know anything about that, that was a wonderful feat, not only for Ireland, but the British Empire at the time. Queen Victoria attended the event, and it was held on what is left of the lawn of Leinster House, just adjoining Merrion Square side. He was a member of the Royal Dublin Society, and he was offered a knighthood by Queen Victoria, which he politely declined. This was the station, more or less. Now it's dated 1861 there. That's an artist's impression, and that appears in Catherine Lanigan's Of This Parish and Gerald Tyler book Kilkenny, Its Architecture and History. But it gives you a great idea that the 19-arch Arcadian wall, with the exception of 3 arches, that's still remaining. The roof is the original roof that's still there, or should I say what's left of it. Most of it has fallen in at this stage. This house here is Continent House, renamed in my time when McDonagh Junction opened. McDonagh Junction took over these 2 houses, which were the offices and the waiting rooms, either side of the Kilkenny to Maryborough railway line. And the other house was known as Priory House, referring to St. John's Priory, of course. This octagonal building was well there until the 60s, and even the palings, they were there. That wall was higher in my time growing up, but that wall was then eventually removed, so were the palings, and this had been removed already. And when the entrance, I'll come to it in another photograph later on, the main entrance was here off the Castlecomer New Road, as it was described at the time. Both these roads, the Castlecomer Road and the Dublin Road, were constructed in the early part of the 1800s, around the same time as the military barracks, which was opened in 1803. And these were following the developments of the 1798 rebellion, that the British, the ruling authority of the day, decided they needed fortifications, and railway stations were to be built close to fortifications like that, so that it was minimal contact for the soldiers with the natives, so to speak. Even out at Corbettstown, that's why there's a railway station at Corbettstown, because the Garda station was an old RIC barracks at Corbettstown. So here we have some detail here. 1847, the railway station is completed. The 12th of May 1848, Kilkenny is linked to Thomastown. That was the first section of the track to be opened. As I said, Gerrapint, the crossing of the River Nore at Gerrapint, delayed it there. And originally the bridge there was a wooden structure which was there for a couple of years before it was replaced by the present steel structure. And at the time, it was the longest single span structure of a railway bridge in Britain and Ireland. 1850, Kilkenny Station is linked to the Cherryville junction just south of Kildare. And any who remembered Cherryville will remember it for the sad occasion in 1982 when 7 people lost their lives and 30 people were injured. And what had happened apparently was that a train from Limerick was en route, ran out of diesel at Cherryville Junction, and a train coming up from Cork behind it ran into the back of it, and the whole thing, because there were wooden structure at the time, just concertina, and thus the accident. I was only up there, would you believe, in the last week or so to see was there any plaque or monument to those people who lost their lives, and sadly I couldn't find any, which is an awful shame that their memory isn't remembered. 1854, the Kilkenny station is linked finally to Ferrybank. That's 6 years after opening in Kilkenny. 1867, then we have the Maryborough line going through to the Connaberry Junction. And the Connaberry Junction, if you go into Portlaoise when you go via Abbeyleix and you come up to the roundabout over the motorway, you carry straight on to Portlaoise, and just at O'Moore Park, where the GA Stadium is, if you turn left at that little roundabout junction after that, about 400 yards up there is the Conneberry Junction. Today it's a massive plant that manufactures the concrete sleepers for the railway lines. I asked the gentleman at the gate, could I take a photograph or two? And he said, sorry, it's policy, no photographs. So anyway, I carried on. I got a photograph at Cherryville. In 1919, the Kilkenny to Deer Park line is open. In actual fact, 2 years later, the passenger service commenced from Castlecomer in 1921. It lasted only for 10 years as in a regular passenger service. And when it ceased in 31, there were specials run to hurling matches to Tramore. Fancy was even relaying a story going to Tramore. And I had heard one in Corbettstown the night I did a presentation in Corbettstown. And a lady who didn't give her name, but she mentioned that it was a big thing to get down to Tramore. It took about 4 hours to get there. Corbettstown is only 6 miles out the road. And she said, by the time you got to Tramore, you got barely enough time to eat your sandwich and your cup of tea, and it was time to come back again. But nevertheless, it was a great experience at the time. Much of the former railway bed on the, what we'll say now is Kilkenny to Portlaoise line, is still visible at several points along the route. I took various photographs of it at the time, like the Dinan Bridge is still intact except for the bed. But this is a photograph of the locomotive shed at the former railway site. And this steam engine, would you believe, the photograph doesn't show the full width of it, but a little bit ahead of it is the turntable. And it was amazing to think that one man was able to turn the weight of that machine on the turntable. So I tell you what, the engineering feat to make a turntable that was capable of doing that and maintaining it was amazing. And over here you had workshops and various things. The water tower was here and that type of thing. I don't know what this particular item was, but it's possible that it was related to the water function coming from there and going into the tank up ahead. So Hammond did a survey, which was an amazing piece of work. It's 120 pages. I have a copy of it. And he was actually engaged by Kilkenny County Council in the 1990s to conduct it. And this is what he came up with on the Maryborough line. There was 9 overbridges, namely the Castlecomer Road, John's Green, 7-span viaduct there at John's Green, Gashouse Lane, Barrack Street, New Road, Bleach Road, Ardaloo and Lismane. And then there was 2 rail over bridges, one at the Dinan and one at the Owen River, or the Owen Beg as it's called by locals, which is just short of Attanagh in County Kilkenny. 8 road over rail bridges at Greens Hill, that was known as Grant's Bridge. There was a public house there in Greens Hill. At one time that's how it got the name, Grant's Bridge. Richview, the Weir, that bridge is still intact. Those bridges are still intact, but they've been covered in. But the Weir is still open, a standalone, a beautiful feature in the Weir housing estate. Knockrow, Ballyragget is open, Old Town Ballyragget, that's just before the straight stretch on the run into Ballyragget. And then Ballyragget, the bridge itself on the Castlecomer to Ballyragget Road. Making a total of 19 bridges. There was 3 gate control level crossings at Clintstown, Jenkinstown, which most people wouldn't even know about. It's hid up a cul-de-sac opposite where Jenkinstown Post Office once stood. Dunamore on the way in, which is close to the graveyard at Dunamore, and then at Rathduff. So this is a site we'd all been familiar with in the 50s and 60s of the old station. And you see like the way the windows were filled in, lovely Georgian pane glass windows, archways a feature. And as I say, this portion of the roof is gone now, and what's left of that is very little. It's still there, but you see the locomotive is actually going over the bridge at that stage. The track was still intact, the railway bridge, and the engine was disconnected from the rest of the train, ran up, changed sides, went up the other side of the train and rejoined the carriages at the other end, and then drove out. That was before the push and pull locomotives came in around 2009. This was the bus depot that was here. There was a lovely embankment here. There was a man named Mick McCarthy who worked in the railway. Is that right, Milo? And it was his pride and joy to keep that lovely flower beds and arrangements and well maintained. And this was an old weighbridge, Murphy's. You'll see it in another photograph. And you'll see the registration plate of the van. That's how I got the year. So roughly it was around 1962 or 63. IP there, DIP there, which was a later plate. And here is the bold Andy Driscoll selling ice cream or chips or whatever else. And he was obviously doing a flying business. The queue backed up. And the way people are dressed, I suspect there was something after being on in St. John's Church on the day. This, as we more or less see it today, what's left. Even then, I took that photograph 3 years ago, the roof was relatively intact still at that time, but the blocked arches and all of that, and then the inconsistent materials that was used, whereas these have been opened and they're a real feature of the station when you come down the embankment and you see them, but the rest then is a sad, pitiful sight. This then is Continent House, that's Priory House, that's where the railway bridge, the girder bridge was removed in the 1980s. This was when the ring road had opened around and they were able to take the bridge down from then. And this the surface car park where various, at least 2 different options of hotels have gone through. There's still a hotel planning permission alive with the council. They came back with about 17 conditions on its latest viewing. So when it will happen, I don't know. But this is the station as we know it today. It was a former goods shed building here, and half of it is used. Basically, there's a cafe, and you go in first, a ticket office, station master's office, and then is what was Fast Track, which was a brilliant service. Why it ceased, nobody knows. A bit like the freight, when the freight ceased with CIE, I'd lost a huge amount of business. But there's an intercity stood at the platform that's somewhat dated in terms of time. The modern rail cars are in now. So as I mentioned earlier on, that's the health warrant. Just to cover that note again, some of the information I would have received was anecdotal. Apologies if there's any errors, and if there is, and you know the factual position, I'll be delighted to hear from you. So the components, how the costs run on railways, it gives you some ideas what had to be done. I'm not going to go through each of those. You can see for yourself the various costs involved. But at the time, the last one is interesting, the level crossings. It was cheaper to build a gate lodge than to build a bridge. That's why you had so many gate lodges on the Waterford-Kilkenny line, for instance. There's at least 7 gate lodges on that line, and it was cheaper to build those than to build bridges. But also in very, very rural areas where only local farmers required access, they were known as accommodation crossings, where the responsibility of the farmer was to open the gate and close the gate. But when not in use, the gates were always open to the train to come through. So the manual work that was involved, each section had to be laid down, and they were known as plate layers. And they had certain equipment, but not great equipment compared to what they have now. They have special cars built that have cranes attached to them and do all this work. And then sections, whole sections, maybe 10 sleepers, concrete sleepers with the rails attached, are laid in sections. So that has sped up the whole process. Again, I'm not going to go through each of these, but these are all the components of a train. We tend to forget when we're sitting on a train, it's just an engine and carriages, and it all goes very smoothly, and that. But as you can see, the different elements involved. And then these are the major jobs on the railway, varying from the boilerman, which looked after the boiler, the brakeman, the bridge inspector, the bridge tender, the chief mechanical engineer, chief fireman, conductor, dray carman, dispatcher, engine driver, fettler. I haven't found out what a fettler was. Do you know, Milo? No. Fireman, flagman, freight conductor, ganger, milesman, length runner, a whole lot. You can see it all through, right down to station master, track foreman, etc. And then again, these are further details of the train, the components of a train. And then the components of a railway station. And so you can see that in 31st December 62, when they closed 238 stations and over 500 miles of railway track, 1,000 people lost their jobs in the railway, which would have been huge at the time in 1962, and all the families dependent on that. And it was an awful shock to the system, but this had been brought in by the government in 57. There was an act passed whereby that no railway line was allowed to make a loss on the 1st of January 64. They set this deadline for it. And in 62, the Kilkenny to Maryborough line had a loss of £1,650. So they closed the line. It was very short-sighted vision, but worse was to come was the speed and the rapidity with which they dug up the railway lines themselves. They could have left them there and brought them back. Now some have benefited, like lovely greenways have opened on sections of track, but today the way commuting has gone and all the rest, and so many people gravitating towards Dublin, pushing all the demands on Dublin city life, that if these lines were open, people could commute from their houses in a very safe and efficient way. Again, the tracks to the permanent way. The permanent way basically is the railway tracks and then all the elements of that. So then we had the language of the railway. There was the permanent way, which was the actual railway line. Bobbies, which were the police. The plate layers were the men who laid the lines. The milesmen had done their job. Parley was short for parliamentary legislation. And we also had plenty of other far more colourful language used on the railway. The locomotive names then, they were often referred to because of their construction type. Skittle alleys, gobblers were the ones who used diesel for fun, combine harvesters because they looked like one, sparkers because of all the sparks that threw out, which caused a number of fires over the years on different railway lines, and the growlers were the ones that made the most noise. In Britain then, some wag came up with different names for the abbreviated initials. The RTW railway was round the world. S&D was slow and dirty. The London North East Railway, late and never early railway. GWR, God's Wonderful Railway, or the Great Way Round. And there were other terms and phrases. On the cushions and off the road, they were basically locomotives that were out of action. A swinger was the guard's van at the back of the train, which usually swung viciously on the line. And double-headed meant the train had two engines in front, and on the collar again was where a locomotive was on its way out. So here we come to factual information, which I can stand over. Kilkenny Station is opened in 1847. 1848, Kilkenny to Thomastown is completed and open. Ferrybank to Limerick line is completed in 1854. The Kingsbridge to Kilkenny Station is completed the 14th of November 1850. In other words, the problem there was they had to finish the run into Lavistown. Because the lines were built by different construction companies, they wouldn't agree to passengers sharing trades, so passengers had to change at Kilkenny to go from the Kilkenny Junction Railway to the South East Railway Company train. Then you had the Kilkenny to Dunkid. This was before we could run into Ferrybank, Waterford. There was a temporary station built at Dunkid. That was before the marshy grounds, 1853. 1863. Then Bagnallstown Borris is opened and completed to Ballywilliam in Wexford 1862. The only reason that I have that on there is because Gore's Bridge Station is on that line, and Gore's Bridge Station, a bit the other way around to Ferrybank and Rossbergen, it's in actually County Carlow. And then 1867, Kilkenny to Canterbury Junction is opened and completed. 1878, Ferrybank to Malahine. That's a lot of people wouldn't be familiar with that. That's about 48 kilometres of that being converted into a greenway now, which is a beautiful facility. And there is one of these tourist trains they have on a section of track down there, which is very nice if you have time during the summer. It's a nice day out to go and visit. Then Ferrybank to Rossbergen near Ross is completed in 1904, and 1906 Rosslare to Ferrybank. Ferrybank to Rosslare is opened 1906. Now, this is very interesting. That's the only line in Kilkenny that has a tunnel in County Kilkenny, Snow Hill Tunnel, Snow House, which is down below in the very south-east corner of County Kilkenny. Snow Hill Tunnel is there, and then it replaced the Thomastown Viaduct as the longest bridge crossing between Kilkenny and Wexford over the Suir Estuary before you go into Wexford. So components of the track, we've covered more or less that already, so we'll move on. So this is, again, it's 1861 map of Kilkenny Station Complex. Here is the old railway station, or engine shed as it would be referred to in railway parlance. That's the one with the roof falling in at the moment. These two buildings, Milo would be very familiar with. Milo worked in CIE, and one was the parcels office, and the other was the permanent way inspector's house, which was there. You can see the multitude of tracks, a busy station. This is the goods store, which McDonough Junction completely refurbished and now houses lifestyle sports. It just goes to show what you can do with a repurposed building. You don't have to knock them all down and cause carnage in doing so, but they can be restored and used for purpose in 2025. This section here is the old workhouse. It was eventually called a hospital, but this section here is still in use as Workhouse Square, where the eateries are in McDonough Junction today. This section, the old sections, this was the dead house. They've been removed. This was the engine shed, a locomotive shed, which I showed you in the earlier photograph here. Workshop was here, and you'll see another photograph in a minute. The roof of Nolan Park stand is just at the back here. But interestingly enough, they don't have the signal box here, which I find strange. Perhaps, I'm sure there was a signal system back in the day. There had to be, but this was known as Williams Lane. It's now O'Loughlin Road, and this is the Dublin Road. This is the presbytery belonging to St. John's Church, and this would have been the entrance to St. John's Church. So Thomas MacDonagh, Patriot Executor, leader in 1960. He was professor at St. Kieran's College from 1903 to 1905, and the station was renamed in his honour in 1966 to mark the 50th anniversary of the Easter Rising. Now, when this happened, there was great upset caused in North Tipperary, and the Tipperary Star at the time ran several articles to say, how dare we kidnap Thomas MacDonagh, but they didn't realise he had been professor in St. Kieran's College. But Mick McGuinness at the time suitably answered the query from Tipperary, and not in a parliamentary language all the time. The CIE, I had to remind them that the station was 175 years old 2 years ago. And I had great trouble because they came back to me. Barry Kenny, he's a very good man for marketing Chorus Umperearn and Irish Rail and all of that. He said they normally just recognise two anniversaries, the 100th and the 150th anniversary. And I said, on the basis that you recognise neither, is there any chance you could recognise the 175th? So, in fairness, he did. And they came up with this plaque, which was unveiled in May 2023. Well done, Barry. So, this then was the Irishness, as I would call it, of of CIE and, well, it would have been Great Southern and Western Railway at the time. The original railway setup would have been very much run on military lines. There was a huge impetus, as I said, to get the railway going in Ireland, and it was mainly to facilitate military institutions, garrison towns, so forth, so that soldiers could travel safely around, but also the gentry of the day, who probably were the only ones who could afford the railway at the time to travel by rail. But in any event, when the Irish Free State was established, many of the station masters and indeed many of the people working on the railway would have had a British military service at the time. So it was very important that there was order because of the cost of setting up the railway lines and all the rest, and the efficiency of them. And many of these men, I have all the station masters listed in more detail elsewhere, they were all very fine examples of how to run a station complex. So then when CIE got into the whole thing, as I said, they made it very much part of the Irish heritage of the country of the day. Thus all these plaques were erected in 1966 to commemorate the Easter Rising. This is a photograph some of you may have seen before, but it's very interesting from a number of points of view. This would have been looking out from the office block that I now refer to as Continent House. And there you can see the brand new St. John's Church, which is still in the stage of construction. And why I say that is because if you look at the walls, it's festooned and adorned with bunting and flags for the visit of King Edward VII. So King Edward visited us in 1904, but the church did not open until 1908. Courtesy of the O'Loughlin family, who went off and found their riches in mining in Australia. But Michael Murphy was a general carrier at the time, so whether he carried people or not. This is the octagonal building which we saw in the earlier artist's impression from Catherine Lanigan and Gerald Tyler's book. You'll see the picket fencing and the lovely lattice gate here with the stone walls. I remember those walls being in situ. So sometime after the 1960s, they were removed. And right down here is the Railway Hotel, or what is known as the Kilford Arms today. Then we have King Edward VII's visit to Kilkenny Castle. He paid a visit for 3 days to the Butlers at Kilkenny Castle, the Butlers of Ormond, and 3 days at that time was very significant. He also went out to the show, Kilkenny Agriculture Show, which is one of the oldest shows in the country. A shame that it's not still being carried on today, but your economics and people's habits and everything has changed, so has the world. But as you can see, King Edward is there, and Princess Alexandra was with them as well. So he travelled by train from Kingsbridge Station via Attanagh and Ballyragget, as opposed to the other route via Carlow and that. And the reason for this apparently was that some of the De Vesey family boarded the train at Abbeyleix to greet the king and that type of stuff, and then bring him on to the Butlers of Ormond. But there was a great story told to me by that man we interred yesterday, Dermot Dorgan, about a local that had claimed fame in Attanagh because he was given the green flag. Normally the train would have to stop at Attanagh, but that was a very important train, so he gave them the green flag for the train to carry through, and he dined out on that for years afterwards. There was a special royal coach built, which I'll show you later in a photograph, and then he attended the agriculture show, as I said, and Kilkenny was festooned with bunting, flags and garland for the occasion. Some nationalists, Republicans flew black flags to express their opposition to the visit. There was a lot of disruption around 1922, and the railways were targeted. The War of Independence, more so than the Civil War, the railways were targeted to disrupt troop movements in the main and that type of thing. That was an incident which had happened at Nesbitt Junction somewhere in Meath, I believe. This was the Royal Saloon, the Royal Carriage, built especially for King Edward's visit. This was the interior, the dining car, and there was a further photograph which I couldn't get my hands on of the actual, I suppose you'd say, the parlour saloon. So we're back here again to this photograph. You'd see here the octagonal building, which was at the entrance point to the station, so I presume there was some form of security or weight checks. And across here you had Woodlock's wine and spirit bar, and also railway restaurant. And you can see the skyline there of the Tulsa, and you can see St. John's Priory down lower, St. Mary's Cathedral, and a number of, as you can see at that stage, it's possibly earlier than 1908, even though that's on it, because St. John's Church hadn't actually appeared into vision. Again, I'm not going to go through all these in great detail. We've covered a lot of them briefly already, other than to say that this presentation, I'll be making it available to Anne, and you can scrutinise it at closer detail. So there was the number of stations that were built in County Kilkenny. So you have Kilkenny, Corbettstown, Castlecomer, Deer Park, Colliery Terminus, Ballyragget, Gorn, Bennettsbridge, Thomastown, Mulnavat, Kilmacow, Scard, and then Dunkid, which was temporary, Sally Park, which was considered different, the North Terminal, as they called it in Waterford at Ferrybank, Glenmore, which is also referred to as Elwardstown, and that's now becoming part of the Greenway between Rossberkin and Waterford, and hope to open the final section of it in the very near future. Then on the Rossberkin to, or the Ferrybank to Carrick-on-Shure line, part of the Limerick line, you had Grangemonkine, and you had Pilltown, Gore's Bridge Station, as I already alluded to, and we covered the rest. Then you had all the railway lines that passed through County Kilkenny. Most of them emanated from Ferrybank or Waterford on that line, but we are in Kilkenny. As such, we had the three main sections, the Kilkenny to Waterford, Kilkenny to Maryborough, and the branch line to Dunmore West, Castlecomer. So the main terminus for all Kilkenny trains is either Euston Station or Plunkett Station, Waterford. The engineering works is based at Inchicore. They had their 175th anniversary a few years ago, which I attended. It was a marvellous occasion. They had every conceivable locomotive and carriage that was built over the years, and plus all the memorabilia. And if ever you get a chance to go up and visit it, it's certainly worthwhile. The 201 class locos used to power the Mark IV de Dietrich intercity services with a max speed of 160 kilometres per hour or 100 miles per hour. The 071 class loco is mainly used for freight operations. This was the workhorse of the railway for many years that we're all familiar with. This is the modern sleek Mark IV de Dietrich locomotive at Connolly Station, and has been used on occasion on the other intercity services. This is what we are all familiar with, and what a beautiful setting. And if anyone knows where that is, I'll give them first prize. And it's the track that runs alongside Wooden Bridge Golf Club below on Wooden Bridge, and it's the most beautiful setting. And the train just moves along seamlessly beside the golf course and the river, the Avoca River, of course. So this is the route, the detailed route through the Maryborough line. So we have the main connections, John's Green, Roach Pond, Broguemaker's Hill, Mount Brilliant, Richview, the Weir, Dunmore West, Ardaloo, Sutton's Rod, Bracken, Clintstown, Jenkinstown, Lismane, Ballycleary, Knockrow, Old Town, Donaghmore, Ballyragget, Smiths Road, Ratduff, Tinnalinton, Cool, Russelltown, and Grennan. Grennan is a townland close to Attanagh. This again, we'd all remember, it's still fairly current, but a bit back in time. But these were the entrance archways to the old station, but it was a more grander entrance than that. back in the day, the one designed by Sancton Woods and adapted by Captain Moorson, then changed it to this. Here today you will recognise that Priory House is undergoing major refurbishment, and they hope to bring it into another building repurposed on the site by McDonagh Junction Holdings, John's Church there. The girder bridge crossed here, and the cut stone wall is a major feature here, and inside it, of course, is the family memorial garden. This was the old girder bridge, and if you weren't careful walking underneath it when you hadn't an umbrella, you got a nice big drop on your head as you passed. This is a portion of the viaduct at John's Green. Again, something needs to be done. The blocked up archway here is not really the aesthetic of it doesn't look well. Girder Bridge. I did suggest at one stage to CIA at a meeting on site that they would give access here, and they would restore, now that the ring road is completed, a pedestrian bridge back into the station for people to walk over. But the views from the bridge of the city would be fabulous, looking across westwards. Again, just one or two shots of the area. This is the surviving abutment of the new road bridge, which crosses here at Grobemaker's Hill. The point I was going to make about John's Green there was that you'll see there the telegraph poles still surviving to this day. And like the telegraph system was sharply introduced after the railways were introduced. It was the next step, because on top of this, each pole, there was a single line, and that line connected each station with the next station, so that the signal would be given, train clear, line cleared for the train to come. Dermot Dorgan told me a story of a certain signalman who remained nameless. He was partial to a little tipple at times, because there was a lot of boring hours to fill in on the line. And the train was stopped in Ballyragget and couldn't get the clearance from Attanagh. So they phoned the postmaster, who of course were the Dorgans. And Dermot at this stage was only 12 years of age. And he had been a frequent visitor to the signalman's cabin, curiosity to know how this worked and that worked. But anyway, so he scooted across the road over. Signalman was fast asleep in the chair. He knew what to do. He pressed the code, the whole lot, and the train was cleared to come through. And the rest was history. But Donald Fenley at the Castlecomer Road of Greens Hill there, this is an actual photograph of steam passing at the back of their doors. As you know, at that time, the train ran down between Castlecomer Road and Greens Hill. And the portions of land here at the back of the house were bought for £10 each of CIA at the time. So if the lads had to club together, all they had to do was buy the portion at each end. The lads in the middle didn't have to pay anything, of course. It's the way it would have worked. This is the bridge at Grants Hill and Greens Hill, just at the top of the road. The Weston is just on your left-hand side here. As you cross over the bridge, you go out onto the Castlecomer Road. This is Richview, and of course this was one time home of Kilkenny Golf Club for a brief period at the start of the 20th century. Then this is the bridge, the standalone bridge in the Weirahausen estate. What a beautiful addition it is. And this is the Kissing Gate, or the pedestrian crossing gate here at Grobemaker's Hill. And there was a movement one stage to get it closed off because of social behaviour, but thankfully the residents came together and ensured that that didn't happen. And this is the bridge which now has access to Dunmore House, to Dick and Nora Gilfile's beautiful house just around the corner. And they've kept the railway bed here, you'll see in another photograph, to use it to drive the cattle along there to bring them from different paddocks, one paddock to another. There's their lovely house there, which is beautiful. This is the former railway bed track just beyond their house, which I showed you in the other photograph. And then the Trinity Church in St John's Parish at Dunmore, And in fairness to the council, they've done a wonderful job creating recreating the mass path trail there for people to walk, and you can park there just adjacent to the old school and that. And you'd see again here the heritage of the railway alongside this path, the telegraph pole still intact. Another example of it, again, I alluded to that earlier on with regards to the telegraph system. This is on the Bleach Road, and you'd see how modern they were thinking at the time. Like, it's a double bridge, so if they needed to lay a second track, they had facilitated that or enabled that with the double bridge. So how did it come about? I'm sorry if I'm talking too much or you want to interrupt me or whatever else with the question. I'll give time for questions and answers at the end of the, so long as the voice holds up. But essentially the catalyst for it was Richard Henry Pryor Wansford of Castlecomer. The Wansfords originally arrived in circa 1636 from Kirkington in Yorkshire, England, having acquired an enormous estate of 22,000 acres in the Castlecomer area. They were known as landed gentry. The proposed arrival of the railway was not without controversy, as in 1890, 30 years before the train's arrival, local carmen, these were the people who collected gold from the colliery, disrupted meetings held to promote the building of the railway. They feared for their livelihood, which was understandable. In 1911, application is made to the Privy Council to authorise the construction of a railway to connect the Leinster coalfields. 1917, Castlecomer District Council supported the construction and urged the Irish Industries Committee, members of Parliament and the City of Kilkenny to support the motion. MP for North Kilkenny, William T. Cosgrave, Liam Cosgrave's father, played a critical role in securing a British War Office grant for the construction of the line in 1918-1919. Wansford and Cosgrave can claim legitimate rights to successfully having secured the line for North Kilkenny. Many landowners along the route were compensated by way of shareholding in the railway company. To keep the costs of laying the new line to a minimum, Great Southern Railway decided to remove the double track from the Kildare to Carlow section of the Kildare to Kilkenny line and use the tracks for this line on the new Deer Park branch line. As early as 1920, the railway company were fast into the traps to sell off the surplus construction equipment with an advertisement in the Kilkenny People. So as you can see, things moved at a pace when they eventually got going, but without Wansford and without Cosgrave, it would never have happened. But essentially what it was all about was exporting the coal to Britain in time of their need during World War I. But as you will note, it didn't open until 1919, and the war was over then. And I was told that the labourers did not work too hard on ensuring it would open before the war was over, but that's an anecdotal story. So the Wansfords lived in lovely style at their domain in Castlecomer. Most of it now, well, I won't say most of it, but a substantial portion of it is Castlecomer Golf Club today, which is great to see people using the estate. Kilkenny County Council and others have been responsible for the restoration of the lake, which any who go on a recent visit, I use it on a regular basis to go up there for a walk. It's a beautiful area, and the lake it's a very soothing walk because you don't meet too many people doing it. So Prior Wansford himself was an amazing man. As I say, the family were 300 years in Castlecomer virtually at the time of his coming, and but they looked after the area very well. But he bailed out the Butlers, you could say, when his daughter Anne married John Butler of the castle, and she brought with her a dowry of 100,000 sterling at the time, and worth in excess of 10 million in today's money, apparently, at the time when that was written. So, as you can see, whether he was in love with her or not, I'm sure he fell in love with her. So, he was elected a representative of North Kilkenny for 1918 to 1922, and he was the first executive president of the Irish Free State from 1922 to 32, and he was followed by Eamon de Valera. So this is the Hunt meeting at Castlecomer House, as it was so called at the time, and sadly it was demolished circa 1960. I suppose the rates and the upkeep of it, I think at this stage the Wandsworths were living in Carlow. They just could no longer afford to maintain it. And that's why they accommodated the golf club with the lands as well. So they did an awful lot of good. And the Wandsworth National School is still a thriving school in Castlecomer to this day. So their legacy, major employment for thousands of people at the mines and their estate over 320 years. The main square of the town at High Street was laid out and planned by the Wandsworths. Many prominent buildings of architectural importance constructed in the town through their benevolence. The Wandsworth National School, as I mentioned. The Discovery Park, again, is another wonderful legacy, and the golf club traverse over a portion of the former estate. This is the coal mines back in its heyday in Castlecomer. And you will see here, this is where the railway line came in. But at that stage, it had even been taken up. But this is, I think, the Ward family. They live next door here, and that would have been their land to come in here. And then there was a statue to Our Lady in this area, which the miners, because of where they worked and how they worked, they had a great devotion to Our Lady in terms of before they went down the mines and when they came up afterwards. But as you can see, the various outbuildings, and they had a pulley system, which was well ahead of its time, brought the coal from the likes of Ardra, Skahana and the other coal fields. So, but this was the main area here in Castlecomer where it was sorted. The trains would have pulled in and the wagons would have been loaded up. This was the mining office, the mining manager, which forms part of the Avalon House Hotel today. And there's a nice memorial to the 1978 rebellion here in front. This is an old baronial map of County Kilkenny, and it shows Castlecomer, which is in the townland of Fasadinan, or Fasadinan, whichever way you want to pronounce it. And most of the areas which are picked out would have been coal fields in the barony there, and the various other baronies of Kilkenny. And the route for the actual Castlecomer end of the journey was Dunmore West. Dunmore West was a very substantial junction. There was about 12 sidings there to hold the coal wagons that would be ferried from Deer Park Colliery and parked up there until they were ready to be shipped either to Kilkenny, Castlecomer depot, coal depot, or onto Waterford for export by boat. And in actual fact, some would have gone to Dublin via Kilkenny as well. So as you can see there, all the various landmarks: Dunmore West, the Pike Road, Carwin's Inch, Ballyragget, Mohill or Mothil, Corbettstown, Jamerstown, Dysart, Castlecomer, up the back of Donegal, Hospital Lane, Barrack Street, Chatsworth Street, Cahogue River, Dean Valley, Mehora, and finally Deer Park. At one point it was proposed to pass Castlecomer on the dining side, but this was shut down by Mr. Wandsworth. He wasn't going to have an old steam engine going through his estate. Now, I visited the site out there at Dunmore Junction, so I'm going to skip through this, but there's heritage landmarks still there to this day. There was two families that lived there, the Shearmans and the McAvoys. They're on both the 1901 and 1911 census. The land is owned by Conor Shea, and he was very helpful in my accessing the land there. But as you can still see, I have a couple of other photographs. These were taken around February time, March time, and where obviously the owners of the houses, or the people who were staying there, planted daffodils, and the daffodils still grow there each year, you know, which is a reflection on over 100 years ago nearly. One of Con's big tractor tyres there, but anyway. But this here, this is where the line separated. This is the line on straight to Ballyragget, and this is where it went around in a semicircular route to go on to Castlecomer. Here's the map of it. This is out from Kilkenny, and this is the line branching off for Castlecomer, and this is the line going on for Ballyragget. There's the houses I mentioned to you, so they were even on the map back then. Telegraph poles are still in situ out there. Nobody likes the telegraph poles in the sense of taking them away. They obviously had plenty of timber and wood. So this is the crossing on the Ballyragget Road that you would meet after Hennebury's Cross. This section of the house was the former gatekeeper's lodge. That's a view from the other side. Sorry the photograph is so small, but it's all I could get. This is a beautiful house that's maintained to this day by Larry and Ann Butler. This was the level crossing. The train crossed at the front of this house, where it was operated by the Marr family, and the Butler family operated the crossing at Kerwin's Inch. But when the Marrs left here, they moved up, and it's absolutely postcard picture perfect. This was the station at Corbettstown, basically a single-storey dwelling. And I looked in the windows of it, and the wallpaper's still on the walls, and the dado rail is there. Everything is intact, the furniture is gone. But you'll see what this beast has done to the house over the years. I suspect this photograph was taken sometime after the electrification of Ireland. You'll see the electricity wire there, so that would have been mid-50s, 1950s. There it is today, the way the beast has gobbled up the house, so to speak. So I've spoken to the lads out at the Cave Bar and Corbettstown and that, and it's their intention to take the ivy from it and all the rest, but there's all sorts of detail they have to go through because they're beside the main road here. So this was the old RIC barracks, so that's why the station was in close proximity to the railway station. That's still there to this day, and a relative of the last guard to have served there back in the 70s is still living there today. So this was a feature. The style was made to make access to the railway line here, and the Gibbons household is across the road, a beautiful old setting. This is Corbettstown, where Matt and Peggy O'Dwyer managed the level crossing which crossed the road here. Still own the property, but there's lodgers living in it now. In fact, I did a bread van run when I left Kieran's College in the early days, and for Martin Mulhall for about 6 months, and I delivered bread to Matt and Peggy O'Dwyer, and there was always a cup of tea available when you went in. This up here is the Cave Bar. I'm glad to say this thatch was put on in 2006, and it had completely, well, more or less completely collapsed in over the last 2 years. And lo and behold, in the last 6 weeks, it's completely been rethatched in a very old style at enormous cost, well over £40,000 it cost to rethatch it. It got a grant of 20,000, but it shows how prohibitive it is to maintain these in cost. But to see it today, it's just fabulous to see it relive, and he's painted it all up, and it's just a lovely spot. This here, you probably have to peel your eyes to see the train crossing. The Dysart Bridge, you can see here, with the train full of coal going across. And this is the remnants of the footings of the Dysart Bridge. Again, further up, because where the Dean River and the Dinan River split. This is where the level crossing was for Lisnafunction Road. And the house, they felt, was no longer suitable to refurbish, restate. They rebuilt this house, but they rebuilt it in the style of what was the level crossing, which I think is a marvellous contribution by the family. They still live there, the Merlin family. This is when the station was opened in 1921. And all the good and great of society were there, from the Captain Wandsworth to E.T. Keane, the famous editor of the Kilkenny People. And sure, there was many others there as well, the usual station masters, etc. One interesting one is that Catherine Lanigan's father, John Lanigan's solicitor, was there on the day. So this was the route it took up the back of the town, so to speak, which has been turned into a greenway pathway. This was the station master's house, Mr. Plunkett, whom I believe the residents of Castlecomer got to know very well. He wasn't given to young people throwing snowballs at him when he was walking down the line. Another pastime apparently was they used to put a halfpenny on the line and the train had flattened it out, and there was a poor fellow who had a shop whose eyesight wasn't too great and passed off the halfpenny as a penny too. This is the embankment at the far side of Barrack Street, heading towards the Clough Bridge, which still is intact today. Again, this is where it crossed the road at Barrack Street. You see an old photograph here, and this, you can see the gates here. Well, barely see the gates here. Going up. This was the military barracks, later to become the Garda station in a section of it. And then this was the Clough Bridge. It The Clahogue River is just on that side of the road. Cross the river, cross the Ballynakill Road, and cross the Clock Road on this side. There's the Clock Road Bridge. Those girders have been removed now. So there's the miners at Deer Park after their day's work, and you can see a few of them there. I think Eugene Conway, this painting is in the church in Castlecomer, the Church of the Assumption in Castlecomer. But miners tended to be very superstitious, but they thanked Our Lady on the way out for getting them up out of the mine safely again. And many of these characters are well known to Castlecomer people. There's improvisation. He hadn't a match, but he was able to light the cigarette at the same time. Mr. Crennan, old gentleman there, operating a pulley system, getting wagons up the line. So on the construction of the line, over 1,000 workers were engaged. Many of them were brought in, so it didn't give an awful lot of employment locally, but they were billeted in all sorts of places and that type of thing. Castlecomer Union Workhouse, which was the military barracks I referred to earlier. The agricultural wage in the UK in 1919 was 60 shillings, which was quite substantial at the time, 70 shillings, £3 or £3.10. However, the railway workers were paid almost close to half of that. It did give some valuable employment. I mentioned the sidings and Corbettstown level crossing options rather than houses being built. The first train with empty wagons arrived at Deer Park Colliery on the 30th of January 1921. Train left 3 days later. The very first train driver was John Leahy from Kilkenny, and loading foreman was Willie Duke from Castlecomer, I presume, or the general Castlecomer area. The train at its peak brought 4 train loads a day to Kilkenny, which was quite substantial at the time. So there's a train standing at Castlecomer station. That's the station master's house, which is still standing in Castlecomer to this day. You can see the wagons are loaded, 2 gentlemen. But these gentlemen dressed extremely well. You notice collar and tie for all 3 of them there. So they presented themselves very well. And the man standing at the background here was obviously possibly the station master of the day. This was just, it's too small to read. The train fares from Kilkenny to Castlecomer. This is the station master's house, largely the same today, maintained absolutely perfectly. This was the station in Castlecomer. This was the station house, and this was the split of the track where the train ran up the back of the town to go to Deer Park Colliery. Is that Maryfield, is it fancy, or the houses there, the first house? Maryville, yeah. You'll find it hard to see, but there's a gentleman walking his greyhound here, and I was told by Paddy Dowland the greyhound's name was Daisy. Very important information for us all. So today, to this day, like the Farrell family continue the connection there. They call the garage the railway garage, and James was particularly helpful to me. So this was the level crossing the gatekeeper's house, just short of Deer Park Colliery. There's a sign on the wall there. It is again one of the old signs from the Great Southern Western Railway. It wouldn't have been originally on the house, but it was, he acquired it and it's up there. And this was the carrier, the horse and cart, collecting coal. It was in the era tractors had arrived at that stage as well. So this is the Deer Park crossing today, looking back towards Castlecomer. And the shrine was moved to the main road out here, the main Clock Road. And again, I covered the level crossings there earlier on. So that was the old entrance to the Ward family house up in the hill. A beautiful house, and what's left of the coal mines is down here. So this is what's left of a hill called, it was one time multiples of this high, Bell's Heap. It was where the slack and the coal they didn't want from the mines was dumped. It was dumped by way of that conveyor belt you would have seen earlier on, and it took several years to get it down to this level. There was a company in Limerick that acquired the contents of the hill and put it into road construction down there in Limerick. This is Deer Park itself, the actual little village of Deer Park. Some of the houses have been adapted with extensions and that, but largely that's where original Deer Park mining people would have lived. And further heritage is on the main Castlecomer Attanagh Road. The pub is still there, on the wall is the rail yard. Back down a junction here, you had the road down to the rail yard where the rail yard football club still operate from, and their club facilities today. The South Leinster coalfield is not just the Castlecomer plateau, as you can see, but it had extensive fields at Skahana, Deer Park, Holly Park, Montean, Garteen, Donie and Rossmore, but they all fed into Deer Park, and that's where the coal was collected by rail from. So just back on the main line to Ballyragget, that's not the Diamond Bridge, but it's not too far off it, but it just exemplifies the construction that's involved. There is the Diamond Bridge today. The bed has been taken up on health and safety grounds. If you get out of your car near the Diamond Bridge, as you go over the Diamond Bridge, there's a small area for parking, and back on the Kilkenny side of the bridge, there's a stile there that you can access and go down two fields, and you will see the railway bridge there. There's the stile I spoke about, and it's just here on this side of the bridge, just there, that parting. Be careful, it's a dangerous spot coming out onto the road. So we're going on with the line, then we're going on to Ardaloo and Ballyragget and the Freshfield roads, and the level crossings that I mentioned earlier on. There's the abutments that are still left, the girders have been removed. That's Jenkinstown Post Office, and this little gatekeeper's lodge, you can see it covered with trees and ivy is there, but amazing that a level crossing there, and even the Kissing Gate is still left there. Now, this is the section road going into Ballyragget, but this was the railway line into Ballyragget. The old road travelled across the bridge here and up the back way, and eventually comes back out to meet the road at the top. That's, as you would see, coming from Ballyragget, looking back towards Kilkenny. And that's the going from Kilkenny, the old road you went over the bridge, and the new road is just to the right of it. Again, that's at Knockrow, to run into Ballyragget, then you had Donie, and the gatekeeper's lodge is still there. The Culleton family still live there. That's a new house built on the former gate lodge at Donie. This is Ballyragget, and you'll see here the approach from Kilkenny. The railway line is here on it, up the back of the town, so to speak. It's a good question, which side is the back of the town, but for some reason or other they always refer to the railway line at the back of the town. And the Castlecomer road was here, the station was there. That's the bridge to Castlecomer from Ballyragget, and the railway station was here. It's the old bridge. Farmer making good use of the bridge. So this was the old station that was in Ballyragget. Again, signal box was up here. First opened 1865, ticket office, the usual. The O'Shea family have a long history with the railway, particularly in Ballyragget and also in Ballyhale. Patrick, station master in Ballyragget from 1895 to 1930. His brother John was station master in Ballyhale from 1891 to 1924. The O'Shea family went on to run several successful businesses in town for many years, including the Super Value in the store up to recent times. Jerry Neeson's was the last station master to serve at Ballyragget. He was transferred to Arklow. Other station masters were Owen O'Brien, Liam Ryan, Tom Hula and John Singleton. And John Singleton served at many stations. He was a man of many talents. He was a great finance man, great bookman. And the local garage in Ballyragget employed him after he retired from the railway. And he hadn't much time for people who he considered weren't contributing to the economy. And he put up a sign outside the office that said, "If you have nothing to do, don't do it here." No, that's not John Singleton. Pat and Kitty Houlihan and Molly Culleton, they were gatekeepers, so dropped off in Doneymore. In other words, the last level crossing in County Kilkenny. And the people at Clinstown, Jenkinstown, which I alluded to earlier, were Catherine and Paddy Conway, and members of their family still live there today. So this was Patrick O'Shea, station master at Ballyragget. And what's lovely in Ballyragget, station is gone. and it's a pity about that, but at least they marked it with Station Avenue, Oscar on Station, they renamed it, site of former railway station. So I suspect the wall on the left-hand side was part of the original station wall. So these two local characters, they used to collect the papers from the train, and they delivered them to various shops and people in Ballyragget. Messrs. Butler and Stapleton, Pat Stapleton used to hand the staff to a through train non-stop, and you see the staff is in his hand there, the green flag. This gentleman looking over the wall, he obviously has no interest in getting the train. There was an excursion from Ballyragget. This was quite a common feature all over the country, but they were generally organised. There was pilgrimages to Knock, were particularly popular, but there was also specials that came in. The specials used to come down to Kilkenny, and some of the specials weren't so welcome during the beer festival. This again is another photograph of Ballyragget station. And this is a section of Old Line Ballyragget as well. And then that's the Gatekeeper's Lodge, the first section of the house. There's the Gatekeeper's Lodge at Rathdolph, and that's Smith's Road. So next up is Attanagh, and as I mentioned, Attanagh, why it comes into Kilkenny, because of a part of its townland is in County Kilkenny, and the church connection with Ballyragget as well. This is the last railway bridge in Kilkenny, Owen Beag, in other words, Small River, or Owen Beg as it's called by locals, and that was the connection actually to Avonmore. Owen Beg was a tributary of Avonmore, Avonmore being the big river. Attanagh is only a little hamlet really, but to keep the heritage of the railway alive, in particular the Donie family. This is a section, this is the old station here that used to exist, and the goods shed is still intact down below, and they got that sign remade in the style that it would have been in the day. But there's a painting, I don't know the person who did the painting, Julie Dorgan, tried to establish it for me, but she found it difficult as well. But there was a live sort of scenario that would have prevailed at the station in its day. Here you can see the old handcart for goods and all the rest. But the detail of the lighting and all this very much prevailed at the day. And this is, for years, CIE, the Irish Railway Preservation Society and the Irish Railway Records Society, didn't know where this was, but Ron Bramley of Abbeyleix, a great railway enthusiast, he identified it as Attanagh railway station. So there was great joy over that. I'm sure our old friend at the signal box has gone home at this stage. But these were the last three locals involved. I presume the train driver is one, the guard is the other, and the other is the local station master of the day, probably Cherry Neeson's, on the last train going through. Again, this is another view of it. And as I say, thanks to Dermot and Jimmy Horgan for all their information. And this is station master at Attanagh in 1916-1924, like the Dorgan family have all these, and a wonderful collection. And you see the happy kids, health and safety didn't prevail back in the day, and nobody got hurt. And that's the crossing on the north side of Attanagh going towards Abbeyleix. Again, it gives you a rough idea of the line. This would have been the level crossing that we would, those of us old enough to remember the bullet idea of the railway crossing. So again, it's great detail on Attanagh station. That's the station master's house in Attanagh. It's almost a replica of Castlecomer station master's house. Again, after Mr. Singleton's family passed away and all the relatives, it's been lived in now by another family, which is great to see, and they maintain it beautifully. This is the old station, the remnants of it that survive, and the Dooley family, they are rebuilding the wall That it's much more advanced than that now, but that was at that stage when I took the photograph here, and they've been great people to keep the memory of the old railway alive. This section here was the station. There was no station master's house. There was the signal master who used to live there. So then it went on from Abbeyleix. It crossed the Attanagh to Durrow Road via a gated level crossing. There was a big debate one time over Durrow or Ballynakill for the station rather than Attanagh. Both would have been substantially larger, but because neither of them could agree which, Attanagh became the neutral decision. You can see it crossed substantial bog just before it reached Abbeyleix. Again, huge cost on the railway at the time to complete the line there. But a lot of that section today, the raised bog here, is a greenway today. But the bridge on the far side of the Cork-Durrow Road is still there. Leaving Abbeyleix to proceed in a gentle northeastern direction to arrive at Canterbury Junction, Cork-Dublin, just outside Maryborough, as I explained earlier, where it's near O'Moore Park. The branch line to extension to Mount Mellick is also connected from this junction now. Mount Mellick line closed at the same line as the Maryborough line, but the idea was at the time they were going to link Mount Mellick up with Mullingar because of cattle production, and it was going to be cheaper for the cattlemen to export their cattle to Britain via Waterford than via Dublin. So plenty of competition back in the day. So this is what Abbeyleix station would have looked like. Now, there's a portion of this building standing today, but a lot of it was converted into a modern industrial complex by late 1960 standards, and it's semi-derelict. But gladly, the station master's house is still very much intact. And the station at Portlaoise, you would imagine, to be more elaborate than that for a large, substantial town like Portlaoise. But no, they were able to work out of that station. So this is the concrete sleeper manufacturing unit at Canterbury Junction. And you'll see here, where the track goes around to the left, that's where it went on to join the Cork-Dublin line. But there's the last train. And the last train from Maryborough was late to Kilkenny, and the reason was the Devesses boarded in Portlaoise to be on the last train to Abbeyleix, and there was great hullabaloo at the time. The train driver was a Martin Ryan from Inchicore. Harry Barry was the ticket collector, and Stephen Ryan was the guard. Then two Thomastown men, Thomas Tyrrell, who family operated the Leggin Gate and still do at Thomastown, and Michael Langley, Station Road, boarded the train at Thomastown. They're the two gentlemen in the photograph there. So we're nearly there. And it goes on to the closures in Ireland, which is self-evident there. Is what, in fairness to the British, this is what they left us in 1923. This was the railway network in Ireland. Incredible. And you would see it's probably the tourist areas like the Glens of Antrim, Donegal, Kerry, West Cork, all of that area, a proliferation of railway lines. There was railway stations nearly every couple of miles, which of course, when it came to the decision about closing lines, they were not economic really at the time. Because as I say again, they were predominantly used for military purposes or for gentry purposes who could afford the railway fares at the time. The ordinary common person would have found it very difficult to afford the lines, but that's why they closed so many of those stations at the time. So they reduced it to the main commuter routes. But again, in fairness to the British, Ireland was probably per head of capita was more densely populated with railway lines than the rest of the UK. This is what we're left with today. So as you can see, it's fairly denuded of railway stations. Like the Northwest is completely ignored apart from the city of Derry, but like the Loop, you have to go to Derry to get there, as opposed to the old line that would have gone to Sligo and onto Bundoran and Donegal and on up Letterkenny and that, plus all the other lines they had. But as you see here, this is us here on this line, and this is why, again, Kilkenny is a junction as opposed to a through line. and then on down to join the Waterford-Limerick line at Granagh in South Kilkenny. New Ross is there, Rosslare is there. The Waterford to Mallow line is gone. And so too now is the New Ross line. But the good news is the Waterford to Rosslare line is reopening with a brand new railway station, and a railway station, as we'll say, of the 21st century. And you'll see it online if you Google Waterford railway station on the North Quays. They're doing a fabulous job, major construction work. They're also building a railway line from Fynes here, from Limerick to Fynes, to cross the Shannon here. Apparently it justifies it for whatever reason. I haven't researched it. But those are two modern developments. And there's other developments. There's various railway plans that are going on at the moment. So it's stopped going backwards at least. So this is what we would have known as, again, this is Kilkenny here, and then going out the road, the Lavistown Junction, which is critical. And this is where the Waterford line and the Dublin line separate. And this is the loop here, the semicircle, and where goods trains. It was mainly built by the Bell train ferry group to stop their trains having to go into Kilkenny at night time when it was totally unnecessary. But there was a big worry at the time that it would be upgraded and that the regular passenger service they would use, they tried to use a passenger service at one time non-stop Waterford to Dublin by not coming into Kilkenny. So you can imagine the reaction they got on that one. But anyway, this is Corbettstown out the road, Castlecomer, then Deer Park, Colliery, and then Ballyragget and Attanagh, which is right on the border here, and on to Abbeyleix and that. And then this is Grangemankind, Fidown, Portlaoise, Carrick-on-Suir. And then the Snow Hill Tunnel, this is where it is. It's very remote, so if you ever want to get there, you want to make sure there's nothing else on the road by yourself. There's high ditches on both sides. I think Rathcormac is the townland near, and this is Glenmore or Aylwardstown. So then again, we've covered all the timelines from earlier on. Too numerous to thank, but I want to thank everybody in association with both my research and with the various talks which I have held. To Anne for her assistance, to Mary Flood, who sends her apologies, who's an old friend, I won't say of how many years going back, but Mary has always been extremely helpful to me, and to you, Fancy, as president of the society, and to wish you luck in the future.